She was merely offering shelter to a starving boy at her mountain cabin door. But 7 years later, when the preacher asked if anyone objected to their union, the entire congregation would fall silent, stunned, as Boone Carter called her his wife. What had started as a simple act of mercy would grow into the most controversial love story the territory had ever known. The wind howled through the pine trees as Cora Maddox heard the desperate knocking at her cabin door. Through the frosted window, she could barely make out the silhouette of someone small and fragile. Hunched against the bitter cold, her hand hesitated on the wooden latch. Living alone in these remote mountains for 3 years since her husband's passing, she had learned to be cautious of strangers. But something about the weak, rhythmic tapping stirred an unfamiliar sense of repetition, true desperation. With a sigh, she pulled open the heavy door. A boy, no older than 17, stood swaying on her porch. His clothes hung in tatters, his face gaunt from hunger. His lips were cracked from the cold, and snow clung to his dark hair, making him appear even more pitiful. His eyes held the hollow, distant look of someone who had been walking for days, deprived of food and proper shelter. "Please, ma'am," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the howling wind. "I haven't eaten in 4 days. I'll work for just a piece of bread." Cora's maternal instinct surged, overwhelming her caution. Without another word, she stepped aside and gestured for him to enter. The boy stumbled inside, his legs barely able to hold him up. She caught his arm as he swayed, feeling how thin he had become beneath his ragged coat. "Sit by the fire," she said gently, guiding him to the wooden chair beside her stone hearth. "What's your name, son?" "Bon Carter, ma'am," he replied in a hoarse voice. "I've been traveling since my folks died of fever. Had nowhere else to go." As Cora moved to prepare food for him, she noticed how he took in the modest cabin with a look of awe rather than disappointment. Most travelers who ended up at her door seemed let down by her simple furnishings and isolated location. But this boy's eyes, filled with genuine gratitude, made her small home feel like a palace in his eyes. She ladled thick stew into a bowl and watched as he ate with slow, careful bites, despite his obvious hunger. He had manners, she realized. Someone had raised him well by his tragedy struck his family. "You can stay the night," she found herself saying. "The storm's getting worse, and we are in no condition to travel." Boone looked up from his bowl, tears mixing with the melted snow on his cheeks. "Thank you, ma'am. I promise I won't be in trouble." But as Cora watched him worm himself by her fire, she had no idea that trouble was exactly what this act of kindness would bring. Because what she thought was temporary, charity would soon become something the mountain community could never accept. Boone woke Ethe next morning to find Cora already moving quietly around the cabin, preparing breakfast. He had slept better than he had in months, wrapped in warm blankets by the dying embers of their fire. But his consciousness fully returned. So did his shame at being a burden to this kind woman. "Ma'am, you should be going," he said, sitting up slowly. "You've done more than enough for a stranger." Cora turned from Thesto, her weathered hands holding a plate of eggs and biscuits. "Not until you've regained your strength. Look, ate yourself, boy. You're nothing but skin and bones." He wanted to protest, but the aroma of real food made his stomach clench with desperate hunger. As he ate, Cora studied him with the calculating eye of someone used to making practical decisions. She saw potential in his lean frame, intelligence in his carefulness, and something else that made her heart ached with unexpected purpose. You said you'll work for food, she said finally. I could use help with thespring planting. My husband used to manage the heavier tasks, and I've been struggling alone. Boone's eyes lit up with relief. Yes, ma'am. I know farming and I'm good with my hands. I can fix things, chop wood, tend animals, whatever you need. But what Cora hadn't expected was how naturally they would fall into a rhythm together. Boone proved to be everything he promised and more. He repaired the sagging fence post with skill beyond his years, split enough firewood to last through the next winter, and even managed to coax her stubborn old mule into cooperation. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire while Cora mended clothes and Boone whittled small wooden figures. Their conversations were easy, comfortable. He told her about his family's farm, his dreams of having land of his own some day. She shared memories of her late husband, stories of the mountains, harsh winters, and brief, beautiful summers. Weeks turned into months, and what had started as temporary charity became as something neither of them had planned. Boone no longer slept by the fireplace, but had built himself a small lean-to to the cabin. Yet he still took his meals with Cora, still helped her with every task, still looked at her with gratitude that had slowly transformed into something deeper. The problem was that Boone was no longer the desperate half-saint starved boy who had knocked on her door. He was growing into a man before her eyes, his shoulders brooding with good food and hard work, his voice deepening, his manner becoming more confident, and Cora found herself noticing these changes in ways that both confused and frightened her, only vanning as they watched the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. Boone turned to her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Cora, he said quietly, using her first name for the first time. I've been thinking about something, and I need to tell you before I lose the courage. Cora's heart hammered against her ribs as she waited for Boone's words. In the fading light, his face looked older, more serious than she'd ever seen it. The boy who had arrived at her door was gone, replaced by someone whose steady gaze made her feel things she had thought died with her husband. I want to stay, he said simply, not just for the season or until I find somewhere else. I want to build a life here with you. The word shung between them like smoke from Thedian fire. Carr felt her breath catch, torn between the warmth that spread through her chest and the cold voice all freezing that whispered about propriety, about what people would say about the 28 years that separated them. Boone, you're still young. You should find Sumi and Aya own age. Start a family of your own. He shook his head, his jaw set with determination that reminded her he was no longer the helpless boy she had rescued. I know what I want, Cora, these months. With you have been the happiest of my life. You saved me from more than just starvation. You gave me a home, a purpose, a reason to wake up every morning. But their conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. Through the trees, they could see lanterns bobbing in the darkness, and Carr felt her stomach drop with dread. Visitors to her remote cabin were rare and never came after dark unless something was wrong. 3 men emerged from the shadows, Pastor Williams from the Valley settlement, along with 2 of the town's leading citizens. Their faces were grim in the lantern light, and chromatically understood that their visit was not a social call. Evening, Mrs. Maddox, Pastor Williams said stiffly. We need to have a word with you about your living arrangements. Boone stood protectively closer to Cora, his hand instinctively moving to the axondo, leaning against the porch rail. Is there a problem here? Son, You're the problem, said Marcus Fletcher, the settlement's self-appointed moral authority. Word's gotten around about you living up here with a widow woman. Folks are talking, and it ain't the kind of talk that reflects well on anyone. Cora felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and anger. What Boone and I do on my own property is no business of yours or Yonel's. When it affects the moral character of our community, it becomes a business, Pastor Williams replied. The boy needs to move on, find appropriate lodging with a family, or tuck up residence in town. This arrangement is unseemly, but as the minute lined their demands, neither Cora nor Boone was prepared for what they would discover about the settlement's real motivations, because someone had been watching them far longer than they realized, and what they had witnessed would force a choice that neither of them saw coming. Pastor Williams reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. In the flickering lantern light, Cora could see it was covered in neat handwriting. Her blood ran cold as she realized what it might contain. Someone's been keeping a detailed record of your daily activities, the pastor said grimly. Times when the boy enters and leaves your cabin, instances of inappropriate facially, shared meals, private tech conversions, him working without hiss or hurt in your view. Boone stepped forward, his young face flushed with anger. Who's been spying on us? Show yourself if you've got accusations. Tomeg. Marcus Fletcher exchanged a meaningful glance with the third man, Samuel Reed, who had remained silent until now. Reed cleared his throat nervously before speaking. It was my wife, Helen. She's been worried about moral influence this situation might have on our own children. She felt it was her Christian duty to document what she observed during her herb gathering trips. CA felt violated and furious. Helen. Reed's herb gathering was clearly an excuse to spy on them, turning innocent moments into something sordid. Every kind gesture, every shared laugh, every moment of genuine companionship had been twisted into evidence of impropriety. You want to know what Helen really saw? Cora's voice shook with rage. She saw a decent young man helping aging widows survive in this mountains. She saw kindness and hard work and mutual respect. If your minds are so poised that you see sin where there is only charity, that says more about you than it does about us. But Pastor Williams wasn't finished. Hump folded the paper completely, revealing page after page of observations. According to this record, the boy has been living here for 8 months. 8 months, Mrs. Maddox? That's well baying temporary charity. Boone reached for Cora's hand, a gesture that made all three men stiffen with disapproval. We've done nothing wrong. Cora saved my life, and I've worked to earn my keep. If that threatens your community somehow, maybe you should examine what kind of community you're running. Samuel Reed's face hardened. Boy, you'd do well, torch your tone. We're trying to help you avoid a situation that could ruin your reputation permanently. And if we refuse your help? Cora asked, though she'd read the answer. The three men exchanged looks again, and Pastor Williams folded the paper carefully before returning it to his coat. Then we'll be forced to take this matter to territorial authorities. A formal complaint about moral corruption could result in legal consequences, neither few wants to face. As the men mounted dire horses and disappeared into the darkness, Cora and Boone stood in stunned silence. They had been given an ultimatum, but what they didn't know was that Helen Reed had witnessed some things during her secret observations. Something she hadn't shared with them on Something that would change everything. 3 days passed. Intense silence after the men's visit. Car found herself jumping at every sound, wondering if Helen Reed was stillicking in the forest with her notebook and poisonous interpretations. Boone worked with grim determination, but she could see the anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. On the 4th morning, an unexpected visitor arrived. Helen Reed herself stood at their door. But instead of the righteous Magneska expected, the woman's face was pale and troubled. "I need to speak with Yarbuth," Helen said quietly, "about what I didn't tell my husband and the others." Cora's heart sank. What else could this woman have twisted into scandal? But as Helen entered the cabin and sat heavily in the offered chair, her demeanor was snouding like the vindictive spy Ka had imagined. "I've been watching you 4 months," Helen began, her voice barely above a whisper. "At first, yes, I was looking for impropriety. A young man and a widow living together seemed wrong. But what I actually saw confused me." Boone and Dakar exchanged puzzled glances as Helen continued. "I saw you nursing him through a fever last month when he got sick from working in the rain. I saw you teaching him to read better by lamplight. I saw him giving you his own blanket when yours got torn and sleeping cold himself. I saw love, real love. Not lust or impropriety, but the kind of deep care my own marriage has never had." Cora felt tears sting her eyes. "Then why did you report us?" Helen's hands twisted in her lap. "Because my husband expected me to find something wrong. Because at meeting, I saw something beautiful, world mean, acknowledging what's missing in my own life. Because sometimes it's easier to destroy what you can't have than to face your own emptiness." But Helen wasn't finished with her confession. She reached into her bag and pulled out another notebook, this one thicker than the first, this contentious. "I really saw every act of kindness, every moment of genuine affection, every proof that what Yahweh is precious and rare. I wrote it down because I wanted to remember that such love was possible." Boone leaned forward intently. "Why are you telling us this now?" "Because last night I heard my husband and the others making plans. They're not just going to report you to the territorial authorities. They're going to come back tomorrow with more men, and they're going to force you apart permanently." The weight of her words settled over them like a shroud. Helen continued, her voice urgent now. "Samuel thinks Iffy can get you declared mentally unfit. They can have you committed to the territorial asylum. They believe any woman who would live with a younger man must be suffering from familial hysteria." Cora's blood turned to ice. She had heard stories of women who disappeared into those institutes never to return. "And Boone," Helen added, "they plan to have you arrested for taking advantage of a vulnerable widow. Marcus Fletcher has already spoken to the sheriff." As Helen prepared to leave, she turned back with one final devastating revelation. "There's something else you need to know," Helen said, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. "The real reason they want you separated has nothing to do with morality." Cora felt her stomach clenched with dread. "What do you mean?" "Your late husband filed a mining claim in this land before he died. Marcus Fletcher found the paperwork in the territorial office last month. There's silver in these mountains, Cora, possibly a lot of it." The revelation hit like a physical blow. Cora sank into her chair. Pieces of a puzzle she hadn't known existed suddenly falling into place. Her husband had mentioned testing some rocks near the creek but she had thought it was just idle curiosity. "If he can have you declared mentally unfit," Helen continued, "the land would likely be sold to pay for your institutional care. Marcus has already positioned himself to purchase it at a fraction of its value." Boone's hands clenched into fists. "So this whole moral crusade is about stealing her land. That's exactly what it is. And if you're in prison for exploitation, you can't protect her or contest the sale." After Helen left, promising to delay them in as long as possible, Cora and Boone sat in stunned silence by the fire. Everything they thought they knew about their situation had changed. They weren't facing moral judgment, but calculated greed disguised. "Us writers, Ness, we have to leave," Boone said finally. "Tonight, if we're nother when they come, they can't force anything." But she shook her head firmly. "This is my home. My husband's buried on this land. I won't be driven away by this and hypocrites." "Then what do you propose we do? Fight them off with an axe and a hunting rifle?" Cora stood and walked to the window, looking out at the mountains that had been her refuge and sanctuary for 3 years. In the distance, she could see lights from the settlement, where men were probably planning her destruction at this very moment. "There's an thing they can't touch," she said slowly, an idea forming in her mind. One thing that would make their accusations minuscules and their legal claims impossible. Boone joined her at the window. "What's that?" "Marriage. If we're illegally wed, they can't claim you're taking advantage of me. They can't declare me mentally unfit for making a rational choice. And as my husband, you'd have legal standing to protect Thailand." The word hung between them, heavy with implications neither had fully considered until this moment. Boone studied her profile in the moonlight, searching for any sign of doubt or fear. "Are you proposing to me, Cora Maddox?" She turned to face him, and in her eyes he saw determination mixed with something that made his heart race. "I'm proposing to save both our lives," Cora said, but her voice carried warmth that contradicted her practical words. "Though I won't pretend there aren't other feelings involved." Boone reached for her hands, his young face serious in the firelight. "I've loved you, Foreman's not as a boy, grateful for charity, but as a man who's found his place in the world, if you'll have me, age difference. And scandal be damned." She looked into his eyes and saw not the desperate, starving youth who had knocked on her door, but a strong, capable man who had chosen her just as had chosen him. "Then we do this tonight before they can stop us." But finding someone to perform the ceremony at such short notice seemed impossible. Boone remembered something Helen had mentioned. Old Thomas Morrison, that trapper who lives up by Eagle Ridge. He's a retired preacher, isn't he? If he's still alive and willing to travel in there. "Doc," Cora said, "it's our only chance." They spent the next hour preparing. Cora pulled out her one good dress, dark blue with small pearl buttons, while Boone cleaned up as best he could with cold water and sharp soap. By lantern light, they looked like what they were, 2 people about to make the most important decision of their lives under the worst possible circumstances. The ride to Thomas Morrison's cabin took them through treacherous mountain paths in complete darkness. More than once, their horses stumbled on loose rocks or hidden roots. But when they finally reached the old trapper's door, they found him not only alive, but surprisingly alert for a man well past 70. "Marriage, you say?" Thomas peered at them through thick spectacles. At this hour must be some powerful urgence driving you young folks. There is, Cora said simply. People want to tear you apart for their own gain. This is only protection. Thomas studied Thembath with the keen eye of someone who had seen every kind of human desperation in his long life. Well, I've seen string of things in these mountains, and if the people want to make a Lego commitment to each other, I reckon that's their right. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. By lamplight in Thomas's small cabin, with only a hunting dog as witness, Cora, Maddox, and Boone Carter spoke vows that made them husband and wife in the eyes of God and territorial law. "You may kiss your bride, Thomas," said with a gentle smile. When Boone's lips touched hers, Ka felt a warmth she hadn't experienced since Heref's husband's death. This wasn't desperate gratitude or calculated protection. This was real love born from months of shared hardship and genuine companionships. But as they prepared to return home as a married couple, Thomas handed them an official Mariaga certificate and spoke words that chilled them both. "You'd better hurry back to your place. I saw riders heading up your way about an hour ago. Looked like they were in a powerful hurry, and they were carrying more than just lanterns." Corin Boone rode hard through the darkness, the marriage certificate secured in Boone's jacket pocket. As they approached their cabin, they could see exactly what Thomas had warned them about. 6 men on horseback surrounding Thayer home, torches casting dancing shadows on the trees. Marcus Fletcher's voice boomed across the clearing. "Mrs. Maddox, we—" "No, you're in there. Come out and face what needs to be done." But when Ka and Boone emerged from Theatrine on horseback, the men wheeled round in surprise. Marcus Fletcher's confided expression faltered as he realized his carefully planned ambush gone wrong. "Gentlemen," Cora allowed, her voice steady despite the racing of her heart, "I'd like you to meet my husband, Boone Carter." The words hit Thegroot like a thunderclap. Pastor Williams spurred his horse forward, his face twisted with disbelief. "That's impossible. No preacher in the territory would perform such a ceremony." Boone reached into his jacket and held up the official marriage certificate. Territorial seal clearly visible in that arch light. "Thomas Morrison might agree with you. The marriage is legal and recorded." Marcus Fletcher's mask of righteousness finally slipped completely. "You can't do this. That land belongs to the community." "You have no right to what?" Cora interrupted. "To marry whom I choose to keep my own property? Or are you finally ready to admit this was never about morality?" Samuel Reed shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "Marcus, maybe we shoulder a conciter if they're legally married." "Shut up, Samuel." Fletcher snapped Fenton back to Cora with undisguised art. "You think a piece of paper changes anything? I'll find another way to get what belongs to me." But Boone stepped forward, no longer the frightened boy who had first knocked on Cora's door. "That sounds like a threat, Fletcher, and threatening my wife on her own land. Well, that might interest the territorial marshal when I file my report about your attempted theft." The men began exchanging nervous glances, clearly realizing they had been manipulated into Fletcher's scheme. One by one, they turned their horses away from the confrontation, leaving Fletcher insistently isolated. Pastor Williams was the last to leave. "Mrs. Carter," he said stiffly, "I hope you know what you've done." "I know exactly what Ividone Cora replied. "I chose love over fear and happiness over other people judgment." As the men disappeared in teeth darkness, Cora and Boone stood Dugda in front of their cabin, truly husband and wife. For the first time, the boy who had arrived starving and desperate had grown into a man who could protect what they had built together. 5 years later, when the silver mine Medetham, wealthy beyond imagination, visitors to the Carter homestead would often comment on the obvious devotion between the couple. Cora had found love when she thought her life was over, and Boone had discovered that sometimes Thegriati's treasures aren't found in Thegron, but in the hearts of those brave now to follow their own path. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch Anotharon Fugital Tale, where destiny and courage collide in ways you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.